If I walked into a room full of electric typewriters, they all stopped running instantly. I could not ride on an elevator in the hospital. They wouldn't run. If I walked down the hall in the hospital, 10 or 15 feet in front of me, people would skid to a stop because they could feel this force field around me, but they couldn't see anything. You feel like an alien who suddenly landed on this planet, and you're trying to speak to them of things that they just don't comprehend, and so they turn away or they reject you. And the energies that now are flowing through from the other dimension become difficult to manage or handle because other people have been conditioned to think there's something wrong with you, you're crazy, you're schizophrenic, you're a witch. And it really began a lifelong path for me of assisting people in the awakening process, whether it's through near death, whether it's through a spiritual awakening.
The A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
We are here with Susan Galvan. She is a therapist, spiritual counselor, and the founder of the Unity of the Spirit Foundation. She recently published a book called Integrating the Light, a Guide for Life After a Near-Death Experience. Hello, Susan. How are you?
I'm good, AJ.
I understand that in 1978, you had an amazing experience that changed your life. And can you talk about that, please?
It was a Saturday evening in November, and I was reading one more book about religion. I had read dozens of them, and this one was about the Shinto religion, which I knew nothing about. And I was about halfway through the book when all of a sudden, something shifted in my consciousness. I don't know how or why. And suddenly everything became quite obvious and transparent to me. I knew what all the symbols represented, what they stood for. And I found that pretty exciting. It was like suddenly the veil had lifted. And then I began looking at other spiritual traditions, and it was the same there. Suddenly they were all transparent to me. And I could see right to the heart of what they were saying. The meaning was obvious. So I got quite excited about that. And but as I went to bed that night, I really didn't sleep well because I was very energized. And by the next morning, the energy was just pouring in through the top of my head. It was very, very electrical. And I was working in a hospital for a clinical psychologist at that time. I went to work, but I noticed during the day that I was beginning to get pretty dissociated. And so I went down to the cafeteria and got some protein to eat, and that helped. But the inflow of this electrical energy, accompanied by all the revelations that were coming with it, just continued to expand and increase in intensity. And not just that day, it did that for 10 days straight. Every day there was more. It was very, very nurturing spiritually, but it was very, very depleting and exhausting physically because it's like having 220 volts through a 110 volt system. And if I walked into a room full of electric typewriters, they all stopped running instantly. I could not ride on an elevator in the hospital. They wouldn't run. If I walked down the hall in the hospital, 10 or 15 feet in front of me, people would skid to a stop because they could feel this force field around me, but they couldn't see anything. And so I really had a very large force field around me wherever I went. And that affected everything electrical in my environment. I was causing power failures at home. They had to come and change the transformer behind my house several times. One morning I was in the grocery store and a revelation bolted into me and the whole shopping center lost power. So I didn't have any reference point for this experience, but it just kept getting bigger every day for 10 days. And then it continued after that gradually as I began to integrate it for months. And if I started talking about it with somebody standing next to me, they immediately got inducted into my experience. which frightened most of them because they didn't know what was going on. This was 1978, so there was no book out there or video or guide to tell me what was going on. The ancient texts don't talk about a downpour of electrical energy through the crown of the head that brings supreme understanding. They just don't talk about that. So there was nothing to help me guide myself through this intense change. And I had to kind of figure out my own way through. Wherever I looked, things seemed to reveal their inner meaning. And so trying now, all these years later to pick out what the first few things were after the Shinto religion that became crystal clear to me, because the revelations continued for weeks and months. And so I could read a paragraph and find enough meaning in there to keep me going for several hours. So it was like seeing down through the layers. And I understood Christianity, I understood Buddhism, I understood Sufism. They became simple for me to comprehend, whereas before they had all seemed quite mysterious. It wasn't like a download of information, it wasn't coming in like data. It was like suddenly being able to see through the veil, through the symbols, through the languaging, through the messaging, to the heart of what was being presented. So fortunately, I had a sister who had gone to work at a university in California in a graduate school of consciousness studies. And she didn't really have any information to help me, but what she did provide was a way for me 9 months later to go to California, move my family to California, and enter the graduate school of consciousness studies. And I was still very highly charged. For instance, recorders wouldn't work around me. They would just record static. So I became a student in a graduate school of consciousness studies, and it was very grounding because I was surrounded by other people who were brought there because they'd also had unusual experiences or awakenings. And so, you weren't the one and only. We were all in it together. And we had some wise people there as faculty and guides to help us begin the integration process. And so that was I always use the imagery of a caterpillar into a butterfly. The caterpillar has to spin a cocoon and then dissolve into green goo so all the inner elements can reorganize in order to form the body of the butterfly. And it cannot leave the womb until the butterfly is fully formed, and then the butterfly has to be strong enough to push its own way out, or it'll never fly. So the Graduate School of Consciousness Studies was my cocoon where I could go through the green goo process and reorganize on a different level. And after I graduated with a master's degree, then I actually created a new master's degree program within the same university to help people with this transformational process. And so at the same time, I was in the Bay Area, and there was something known as the Spiritual Emergency Network, because there were so many around 1980, there were so many people in that area and spiritual teachers coming in from all over the world and doing practices and giving workshops, and a lot of people were having side effects. So I worked with the Spiritual Emergency Committee to help other people with their experiences, and it really began a lifelong path for me of assisting people in the awakening process, whether it's through near death, whether it's through a spiritual awakening, whether it's through tragic loss, which also can break people open. This became my work to help them find the path and the process that would allow them to integrate the new awareness, the new energies coming in, to be grounded, to connect earth and sky together, and to become a conduit for the light to come in and begin to transform our world. And it was wonderful work. I taught courses on paradigms of consciousness, on the highest nature of human consciousness. And of course, I told people when they came in my graduate program, you're not going to earn a living doing this work. This is not a master's degree program to get a trade. You're coming here for your own personal transformation, and so you can be a transformative agent for other people as well. I had many of the best guest lecturers of the era there as my co-teachers. And so I learned a lot that helped me be a capable facilitator for a lot of people. And my process, of course, continued too. It didn't stop, but it was the intensity really diminished over time. I became, more grounded myself, which helped when I was then with other people who were in very altered states of consciousness. And I helped them understand how to ground themselves, things that they could do that would moderate and mediate the symptoms that were driving them kind of crazy. Raymond Moody's book came out in 1975. And I had read that book in 77. I actually gave it to my stepfather, who was an engineer and a complete atheist. He read that book, and he said it changed everything for him. And he died 6 months later. So I already knew the power of that writing, that work, that message. And Ken Ring came as a guest speaker. People from the near-death world were, but it was still brand new because until we had the resuscitation techniques that began around 1970 of CPR and defibrillators, people didn't have near-death returns. And so it was still a brand new thing then. And a lot of doubt, a lot of questioning. So different from now, where literally millions of people have come back to tell their stories.
Can you recall any specific case or cases of people who have had a near-death experience and whom you have helped?
I remember one woman. This was a woman who was an extremely wealthy woman. And she finally asked if she could have a private meeting with me as her minister. And so we met in my office, and she was very anxious, very timid about even telling me her story. But she said, I have to tell somebody, and I hope you won't judge me or condemn me for telling you this. I said, of course not. Of course I wouldn't. So she began telling me her story. She'd been in an accident. She had left her body and had, awakened in a completely different realm. And it had been the highlight of her life, but she had never been able to share it with anybody. And so she sat there and told me her experience and her story. And I just listened because, empathic listening is the greatest spiritual practice there is when you're working with other people. You don't have to explain things or tell them stuff or teach them or fix them. Just let them tell their story. Listen with an open heart and with a positive acceptance of what they're telling you. And that's what I did with her. And she became, a very close supporter of the ministry going forward. But it was just because she felt the connection had deepened so much when she could tell her story. So that's what I would say to people, family and friends, if they could just listen with an open heart, let people tell their story, just be with them. You don't have to fix them or correct them. Just be there, be with them, with love, with non-judgment as much as possible. That's the path of healing for all of us. So there have been others along the way. And That's why I've been kind of fascinated by it all along, because I knew it was real. I knew it was authentic.
What do you think are the main changes in near-death experiencers?
The biggest one is the experience of unconditional love. Absolutely immersed in unconditional love for most of them. And the fact that they have not been judged. There's been no judgment, no condemnation, no punishment. So that kind of changes the ground of being for a human. That is the biggest one. But then beside that, and a lot of people will not accept that who have not been there. But next to that, the state of openness and the energies that now are flowing through from the other dimension become difficult to manage or handle because other people have been conditioned to think there's something wrong with you, you're crazy, you're schizophrenic, you're a witch, they whatever the label is, Satan has got you. There's a lot of negative feedback and negative reactions, and that's really hard to deal with. The third thing is managing your own body, your own perceptions, your own emotions, and your own thoughts. And without guide rails or guards to help you sort through what is authentic and what tends to be confabulation, that's tough for most people because they don't have enough background or built-in knowledge to be able to make that kind of discernment. So they need guides. They really need people who can help them sort out, what is authentic, what's real, and what is kind of going off the edge.
What do you think is the main problem that near-death experiencers have?
When they come back, what they want to tell people goes against everything or so much of what we've all been conditioned to believe, whether it's through science, whether it's through religion, whether it's through professional psychology. A tremendous amount of resistance is met, and then even within your own family and friends, because it sounds like something they can hardly believe in it. That's not what they've heard about before. So you feel like an alien who suddenly landed on this planet, and you're trying to speak to them of things that they just don't comprehend. And so they turn away or they reject you or they reject your experience. And I think that's the hardest thing. It's very isolating, very alienating. I think what IANDS has done has created a community where it's so important to be with other people who know what you're talking about and can affirm your experiences. So that's been really the only outlet that people have had, is that sense of community through IANDS. I was a minister. I had a church for 14 years called Unity of the Spirit. We started in Berkeley, California. And there were lots of people going through spiritual experiences and awakenings. And some were related to near death and some were not.
How have you helped near-death experiencers integrate their experience?
The most important thing is number one, you're not crazy. This is an awakening. This is part of your human journey for your soul. And so it has purpose, it has meaning, it's important. And it's your job to bring it into this world as best you can, into your daily life, into who you are as a human being, and find ways to bring that light to others as well as time goes on. And so it was all about integrating, grounding, assimilating, and then sharing that process. And that was the whole purpose of it. So it was to give them community, first of all, and to affirm that it was a positive thing, not a negative thing, and that it was a spiritual opportunity to truly live a life worth living. My husband's had a near-death experience, but the interesting thing is I didn't know about it until this year. He never spoke about it because he didn't trust it either. It was a wonderful experience, but he had grown up in such a traumatic neighborhood and childhood and family that he thought it was all fantasy somehow. He couldn't embrace it himself. But we began going to the IANDS meetings about a year and a half ago, and as he watched people tell their stories, and in the circle of people who understand this process, he began to accept his own experience and to share it. So even the person closest to me, knowing I was doing all this work, was afraid to articulate it. And until he understood for himself that it wasn't insanity, it wasn't crazy, it wasn't just a dream. Before I had that main opening, I had had other experiences where they were very resonant, very similar to some of the things that near-death experiencers also go through. So I was personally familiar with some of that, particularly with the light and direct experience of the light myself, and also a direct experience of the radiance of the next level of being. I had in a meditation experienced that the whole environment was radiant. And so I had pieces of that, but not to the degree or extent that a near-death experiencer would be able to talk about.
You recently published a book called Integrating the Light, a guide for life after a near-death experience. What can you tell us about this book?
What I can tell you is it was a joy to write. I sat down and it just poured out of me. I wrote it, I sat and did it every day until it was done. And it was the most enjoyable writing experience I've ever had because I've lived this. And I've lived it with other people as well as with myself. And it's been so rich, so meaningful. And yet, as I looked around the landscape for near-death experiencers, what I saw is I couldn't find another book out there to guide them, to give them a path, to give them a program, to give them a platform, to give them something to make sense out of what was going on with them. And so that's what I felt inspired to do was, at this stage in my life to put out that book, that guidance, and that way of teaching people how to be with their own process and to embrace it.
I had the privilege of writing the foreword of this book. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
that. How do you think this book can help someone who is now struggling with an experience they don't understand and is watching this video?
I think reading through the book begins to bring things into perspective because I think I've been comprehensive enough to address the major issues to where it may not fit everybody's experience because everybody is different, but there's enough there for any one person to feel more grounded, more accepting of their own experience, and to feel hopeful that there's a way to really find the value in it. So many people are told when they're sent back, are given a mission, or they're told, you're not finished yet with what you set out to do in that life. And so that message is kind of pull yourself together when you get back, take this inner light that is with you all the time now, and find a way to, complete your path, do your service, bring the light into the human reality.
You recently created the Unity of the Spirit Foundation. What
Right.
is you mentioned that was created to help near-death experiencers integrate their experiences, right?
Near death and people who've been through spiritual awakenings, because often the experiences overlap. The near death experience is much more profound and extensive. but spiritual awakenings are still at the same, they're in the same neighborhood. So I want to have a place where people can find the path, the guidance, the things to do, the ways to reconnect with people, to reconnect with themselves, to let their own lives blossom in a whole new way. So they need, one of the things they used to say about my church, the people who went there, was it was like a petri dish. People would come there, and in that fertile setting, they would grow. And when they had finished growing there, then they would go on to somewhere else, which was fine with me. So I want it to be like that. I want it to be a place of fertile soil, fertile support, to help people blossom into who they came back to this world to be. They can go to the webpage, which is unityofthespirit.foundation. And there's a place there to, sign up, get on the mailing list, and make a connection. This is all relatively new. I did have the church, for 15 years. Unity of the Spirit Foundation is a new foundation that we've put together to be kind of the core housing place for this work. And so we're still just getting started, but the plan is to offer all kinds of different programs of support, conferences, groups, individual support and counseling or care. There's a whole variety of things that we're in the process of putting together, but we want to have feedback from people too as to what they think they truly need and what would be of the greatest help to them. So I'm going to the IANDS conference next week, and I'm going to be sitting at a table in the vendors area so I can sit and talk with people and ask those questions. What can we truly do that will be of service to you? How can we help you in the best way for what you need? And we'll put it all together.
Where can people get your book?
It's on Amazon. And so it's called Integrating the Light. It's on Amazon. Right now, it's at a very low price for the next few days. And I just did the launch over the weekend. So I'm waiting for reviews and so forth to start coming in. But people who have read it apparently like it a lot, which is gratifying to me. I'm glad that it's connecting.
How can people contact you?
Well, through the foundation. I also have a page or a website for Galvanic Communications, which lists my individual interests and activities. So galvaniccommunications.com would be another connection point for me personally.
Is there a message you would like to give to people who are watching?
If you've had a near-death experience, congratulations. I know it didn't feel that way a lot of the time, but the fact that you have directly experienced the truth, of who we are and why we exist, and the love that enfolds us, and the wisdom that guides us, join me. Join me in bringing that into this world, which badly needs that. We can each do it in our own simple ways. One of the things that I do want to create through the foundation is trainings for a ministry of presence. This is practiced by other people in other ways, but it's a simple practice that anybody can do. It's a ministry, a personal ministry, but it's really just about presence. And yet there is a skill set involved in it. And if everybody learns just how to be a minister of presence, that will transform the world right there. So We don't have to do something big or spectacular or get famous or any of that stuff. We just need to know how to truly be with each other.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.